I have worked in land management for most of my adult life. I spend weeks out of every month in rural and remote areas, surveying parcels of government land, documenting boundaries, checking for encroachments, logging coordinates. I have been in more remote places than I can count. I have been alone in landscapes that most people will never see. And I have almost always felt at peace out there. The wide, empty places of the country do not frighten me. Or they didn't. This happened on a Tuesday in late June, in the deep pine country of the Mid-South, a stretch of BLM land that was flagged for a routine survey. I was alone, which was normal. My work typically involves one person, one truck, and a full day of slow, methodical walking. I had been walking transects for about 2 hours when I came to the clearing. It was not on any of the maps I carried. Clearings in dense pine are not unusual. Sometimes they form naturally around rock outcroppings, sometimes around old fire scars, sometimes around depressions in the terrain. But this one was different. I could see from 30 feet away that the clearing was man-made. The tree line around it was too regular. The ground inside it was too flat, as if it had been graded at some point. And there were structures. The first thing I saw was the school bus. It was parked at the far edge of the clearing, up against the tree line, tilted slightly where one side had sunk into the soft ground. Old, late 60s or early 70s, the kind of flat-nosed bus that is barely manufactured anymore. The paint was almost entirely gone, just patches of faded yellow under a film of rust and moss. The windows were broken out, the tires were flat, and had partially deflated into the ground. That bus had not moved in decades. To the left of the bus, there was a swing set. Steel frame, 2 swings with no seats, just the hanging chains, moving slightly in whatever air was drifting through the clearing. And in the center of the clearing, there was a merry-go-round, one of the old metal ones, a large circle of flat metal and grip bars, the kind you find in schoolyards from the 50s and 60s, the kind that have mostly been removed from modern playgrounds because children kept getting hurt on them. It was rusted, heavily. The surface of it was almost entirely orange, with corrosion, and it was spinning. I stopped walking. I remember the exact moment I registered it. My brain processed the clearing, processed the bus, processed the swing set, processed the rust and the abandonment and the strange flatness of the land. And then I looked at the merry-go-round, and it was spinning. Not quickly, not violently, slowly, steadily, in a smooth and continuous rotation, the way something spins when it has been pushed by a hand. I stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it for a long time. There was no wind. I am a person who pays attention to conditions. I track weather for my work. I had been walking in still air all morning. No movement in the tall grass, no movement in the pine canopy above me, no movement in the chains of the swing set beside it. The air in that clearing was completely still. Only the merry-go-round moved. I called out once, clearly, the way you do in unfamiliar terrain. "Hello, is somebody there?" Nothing. No movement from the tree line. No response. No sound at all, except the soft, regular creak of the merry-go-round's axle as it turned. I stood at the edge of that clearing for what felt like a long time. I am not someone who spooks easily. I am not superstitious, but something in my body had gone absolutely rigid, that deep animal refusal to step forward, the kind of stillness that predates rational thought. I made myself take out my field notebook and write down what I was observing. The time 11:14 a.m. Wind conditions, none. The merry-go-round was rotating at an estimated 1 revolution per 8 to 10 seconds. Consistent speed, no acceleration, no deceleration. I called out again. I waited. The merry-go-round turned. I turned around and walked back to my truck. I told my supervisor what I had found. He sent someone else to check the coordinates the following week. He found the clearing. He found the school bus. He found the swing set. The merry-go-round was still. We requested historical records on that parcel going back to the original survey. Our agency archaeologist pulled old maps, old ownership records, old aerial photography. We found nothing. No record of a school, a settlement, a camp, a church, a community building, or any other structure on that land. The school bus was not in any database of missing vehicles. The playground equipment was not on any records we could find. Whatever that place was, whatever had been built there, and by whom, and for what, and what had happened to the people who built it, there was no trace of it anywhere in the official record. I went back once, a few months later, on a clear October morning with no cloud cover and no wind forecast. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. The merry-go-round was still. The chains of the swing set hung straight down. I walked into the clearing, something I had not done the first time. I walked over to the merry-go-round and put my hand on it. It was cold. In October sunshine, metal left alone in an open field should carry some warmth. It was cold in the way of something that has been in shade for a long time. I looked at the axle. There was a thick collar of rust there. Decades of accumulation. Nothing that should turn easily. Nothing that should turn at all without significant force. I pushed the merry-go-round. It resisted, stiff, grinding, decades of corrosion in the bearing. It took real effort to get it moving. When I let go, it slowed and stopped in less than half a rotation. I looked at that axle for a long time. I drove home, and I have not been back. I do not know what turned that merry-go-round. I do not know who built that place, or what it was for, or what happened to whoever used it. I do not know why there is no record. What I know is that I stood at the edge of that clearing at 11 in the morning on a completely still day and watched something spin that should not have been spinning. And that was enough. That was more than enough. I want to tell you about the night I sat across a fire from a man whose smile I have never been able to stop thinking about. I want to tell you what he said and what we did and what we found out after. And I want you to understand that what I am describing is not a campfire story. It happened to me. It was a Friday in early October when my friend Jason and I drove out to the trailhead. We had been planning this trip for a couple of months. A 3-day backpacking trip into a section of the mountains that Jason knew well from childhood. An area where his family used to go before his father passed. He had been wanting to go back for a long time, and this was finally the weekend. We were both in our late 20s, fit, experienced, not the kind of people who panic in the backcountry. The trailhead parking lot had one other vehicle when we arrived, an old dusty SUV, the kind that had seen a lot of road miles. It looked like it had been sitting there for at least a day, maybe longer. We signed the trail register, adjusted our packs, and started out. The first day was an 8-mile push, mostly flat until the final 2 miles, which climbed hard up a mountainside to a campsite that Jason remembered from when he was a kid. He was right about it. About 3/4 of the way up the mountain, there was a narrow shelf of flat ground on the cliff-top side of the trail, with an unobstructed view of the whole valley below. We set up camp as the sun went down. We built a fire, ate dinner, and sat talking until well past 10. The night was clear and freezing. There was no wind. The stars were extraordinary. We had not seen or heard another hiker all day. It was close to 11 when we heard the footsteps coming up the trail from below. No headlamp. That was the first thing I noticed. Every hiker knows you do not walk a mountain trail at night without a headlamp. It is not a style choice. It is not optional. In terrain like that, in the dark, without a light, you are asking to fall. But there was no light, just the sound of footsteps. And then the man stepped into the firelight. He was average height, average build, wearing hiking clothes that looked cheap and wrong, like he had bought them that day at a gas station convenience store. Not like clothes that someone had broken in on actual trails. He had a small pack that looked almost empty, and he was smiling, not a natural smile, not the tired, relieved smile of a fellow hiker who has been on the trail all day and is grateful to see another human. This was a fixed smile, wide, still, the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes, that does not move when the mouth moves, that sits on someone's face like a mask they forgot to take off. Jason stood up. I stood up. "Hey," Jason said, "you need something?" The man looked at Jason, then at me. The smile did not change. He said he was a park ranger. He said this section of trail was closed for the season. He said we needed to pack up and come with him. Right now. I looked at Jason. We both knew this was a lie. We had purchased permits for this exact location from the state agency 2 days before. The park was not closed, and park rangers do not come up mountain trails at night with no light, no badge visible, no radio, wearing store-brand hiking clothes with an empty backpack. Jason said we had permits and that the park was open. The man's smile did not change. He repeated what he had said. "Pack up, follow me. Right now." There was something in the way he said it that I cannot fully describe. A flatness, as if the words were a script he had rehearsed, as if the argument was a performance designed to get us moving, rather than a genuine exchange. I looked at him then, really looked. His hands were at his sides. He was not fidgeting. He was not cold, though the temperature was well below freezing. He was watching us with that fixed expression and those still, patient eyes, and something in me went completely quiet, the kind of quiet that is not calm, the kind that is the body shutting everything down except the oldest systems, the ones wired for survival. Jason told him we were staying. The man looked at us for a long time. He said, "That's a mistake." Then he turned around and walked back down the trail, into the dark. No light, the footsteps faded, and then there was nothing. We sat there for a full minute without speaking. Then we kicked dirt on the fire, got into our sleeping bags with our boots on, and did not sleep. Not once, not for a moment. At first light we broke camp and hiked out fast, covering 8 miles in a little over 3 hours. The dusty SUV was still in the parking lot. We drove home. We reported what had happened to both the Park Service and the county sheriff. They took it seriously enough to send someone out. They found no park ranger in that area. No record of anyone working that section of trail that weekend. The man had lied. What he had planned, why he wanted us to pack up and follow him into the dark woods alone, with no witnesses, no light, no radio. We never found out. I have thought about it many times. I have tried to find a version of events where his intentions were innocent, where he was just lost, just odd, just the wrong kind of strange at the wrong time. But the smile will not let me. The stillness of him, the patience, the way he stood in our firelight and waited. We never found out what happened to whoever drove that SUV to the trailhead. We never found out if they came back out. We never found out who he was. I think about that trail sometimes. The cliff shelf, the valley below, the extraordinary stars. I think about how beautiful it was. And then I think about the footsteps coming up through the dark without a light. And I do not think about it anymore. I want to be clear from the start that I do not believe in the supernatural. I say this not to protect my reputation, but because you need to understand how hard I tried to explain this rationally and how completely I failed. I am a level-headed person. I am an engineer by trade. I have spent years hiking the Appalachian Trail in sections, and I approach the backcountry the same way I approach most problems, methodically, without drama. So when I tell you what happened on a 3-day section hike in western North Carolina in the fall of 2 years ago, I am telling you because I genuinely do not have an answer. And not having an answer is not something I handle well. There were 3 of us, myself, my college roommate, and a friend of his from work who had started getting into long-distance hiking. We had done this particular section before, my roommate and I, but the third member of our group was newer to serious backcountry travel, so we chose a stretch that was beautiful and moderately challenging without being punishing. The plan was to cover about 8 miles the first day, make camp near a gap, do the long middle stretch on day 2, and come out at the road crossing on day 3. Day 1 was perfect. Good weather, no one else on the trail, the kind of deep woods quiet that settles over you like a warm coat once you get far enough from the road. We were a couple of hours in when we came around a bend and found it. In the middle of the trail, leaning against a large flat rock, was a stick figure. Not naturally fallen sticks. This was constructed. Someone had taken thin branches, roughly the same diameter, the same color, and tied them together at deliberate joints to form a clear humanoid shape. It was about 18 inches tall. The proportions were slightly wrong in a way that was hard to name. The limbs too long, the head too small, the spacing between the joints off by just enough to make it feel like something that was trying to look human, rather than something that was... My roommate stopped walking when he saw it. The other guy laughed nervously and said, "Blair Witch," which broke the tension just enough for us to keep moving. I stood there looking at it for a moment. The craftwork was deliberate. Whoever made it had taken time with it. It had been placed in the center of the trail, with the kind of intentionality that made it feel like a message rather than a prank. But my rational brain said, it's a prank. Someone hiked out here, made this, left it for the reaction. I picked it up and put it in my pack. I do not know exactly why. I think I told myself I would carry it out rather than leave it as litter. I think, honestly, some part of me just wanted to keep it. We hiked the rest of the day without incident, made camp as planned near the gap, built a fire, cooked dinner, talked for a long time. The night was cold but dry, the stars extraordinary above the tree line, the fire warm. None of us mentioned the stick figure again. We went to our tents around 9:30. I was out within minutes. I woke up when it was still dark, just before 6. I was the first one up, which was typical. I unzipped my tent and went to restart the fire. The coals were cold, completely gray. I reached for the kindling, and I saw it. Sitting on top of the cold fire pit, centered perfectly on the ash, was an identical stick figure. I stood there for a long time. My brain tried very hard to process what I was seeing. Same dimensions, same construction method, same slightly wrong proportions, the 2 long limbs, the small head. My first thought was that one of the other 2 had made it as a joke. I checked my pack. The figure I had collected the day before was still there. That stopped me cold. Whoever placed this new one had not had access to the original to copy it. They had either made it from memory or made it entirely independently, which, given the precision of the match, seemed essentially impossible. I called out to the other 2. They came out of their tents. I showed them what I had found. Both of them swore, immediately and seriously, that they had not made it. I believe them, not because I am naive, but because I know what a guilty face looks like, and because neither of them could have made it without being able to study the original, which had been in my pack all night. We were 2 days into deep back country. We had heard no one else in camp. No footsteps, no voices, no crack of branches in the night. The fire had been cold since sometime before midnight, which meant the figure had been placed after the fire died and before I woke up. Somewhere in the middle of the night, when all 3 of us should have been asleep. Someone had been in our camp. Someone had stood at our fire pit. Someone had placed that figure deliberately, carefully, exactly where we would find it. And they had done it silently. The 3 of us looked at each other. No one said Blair Witch this time. We broke camp faster than we had ever broken camp. We adjusted the route to cut back to the road crossing a day early. We moved in a tight group, faster than was comfortable, not talking much. I carried both figures out in my pack. I do not know why. Some part of me thought that if I left them, something would happen that I would regret. We reached the road crossing around 2 in the afternoon. We drove home. I still have both figures. They sit on a shelf in my workshop. I have looked at them hundreds of times, trying to find the flaw in my memory or the explanation I missed. I have measured them. The proportions are identical to within a fraction of an inch. The knotwork is identical. The specific way the head is attached, slightly tilted, slightly too far forward, is identical. I have shown photos to people who tie knots professionally. They have no explanation. I have shown photos to forensic artists. They have no explanation. I do not have a rational answer for what happened that night. I have pulled the whole thing apart, scenario by scenario, and there is no version of events in which the known facts produce a comfortable outcome. Someone was there. Someone watched us make camp. Someone watched us go to sleep. Someone walked into our camp in the dark, placed something at our dead fire, and left without waking any of us. And they made it from memory, or they had been watching us from the moment we picked up the first one. The trail burned in a wildfire the following spring. I do not know what was in those woods. I do not know if I want to. What I know is that something in those mountains watched us, tracked us, and left us a message. And I'm still not sure what it said. There's a section of trail in the mountains of eastern Tennessee that I will never walk again. I need to make that clear before I start, because by the time I finish telling you this, you will understand why. I have been hiking all my life. My father took me out when I was 5, just a short loop through the state park near our house. And something about the quiet of the trees got inside me and never left. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I was doing serious mileage, multi-day treks, overnight backcountry, off-trail navigation. I knew how to read weather, how to hang food, how to identify the difference between a cracked branch behind me and actual footsteps. I knew the woods, or at least I thought I did. The trip I'm about to describe happened on a Saturday in late October, the kind of October day that is perfect for being in the mountains. The air was cold and clean, the leaves were turning, and the light came through the canopy in long golden shafts that made the whole trail feel like something out of a painting. I was hiking with my girlfriend at the time. We had been together for 3 years, and we shared the same love of being outdoors. It was actually one of the first things we bonded over. We had done this particular trail twice before. It was about 11 miles round trip, with the first 4 being gentle and gradual, and the last mile and a half climbing hard before opening up onto a ridge with a view that made your chest ache. We started early that morning, maybe 8 o'clock. The trailhead parking lot had 3 other vehicles in it: a beat-up Subaru, a newer pickup with a kayak rack, and a blue sedan that looked like it had been there for a day or two. I noticed the sedan actually, just a passing thought. Windshield had some dew on it, like it had sat through the night. But I let it go. We signed the trail register, adjusted our packs, and started walking. The first couple of hours were genuinely beautiful. We talked, we pointed out birds, we stopped to eat trail mix at a wide bend in the creek, where the water was so clear you could count the stones on the bottom. My girlfriend took photos. We laughed about something stupid one of her coworkers had said the week before. It was the kind of morning you store in your memory and take out later when everything feels gray. We reached the ridge just before noon. The view was everything I remembered. The whole valley laid out below us, the ridge running north in both directions like a spine, the sky so blue it looked fake. We sat up there for maybe 45 minutes, eating lunch, not saying much. There was no one else on the ridge. No sound except wind and somewhere far below a hawk crying. We started back around 12:30. The descent on that trail is steeper than the approach in a few places, and you have to watch your footing on the loose shale. We were maybe 20 minutes into the descent when I heard it. A footstep, just one, from somewhere behind us and slightly above, the ridge we had just left. I turned around, nothing. No one on the trail, no movement in the trees, just the empty path curving back up toward the summit. My girlfriend didn't hear it. Or if she did, she didn't say anything. I kept walking. 30 seconds later, I heard it again. This time it was clearly more than one step. It was a rhythm. Not the stumbling, crunching sound of someone negotiating loose trail, but something more deliberate, something pacing. I stopped. My girlfriend stopped with me. I turned around again and looked hard up the trail, all the way to where it bent out of sight. Nothing. The trees on either side of the path were mixed hardwoods and pine, dense enough to block the sun in places, sparse enough in others that you could see 20 or 30 feet back into them. I looked into the trees. I could not see anyone, but I had that feeling, the one that is not quite sound and not quite sight, something older than both, a signal your body sends you from whatever part of the brain is still wired for survival. Something was there. I told my girlfriend to pick up her pace. She looked at me, read my face, and did not ask questions. We moved faster. The footsteps moved faster. There was no pretense about it now. Whatever was behind us was keeping pace, not running, not crashing through brush, but matching us step for step, staying just far enough back to remain invisible, close enough for us to hear. My girlfriend grabbed the back of my jacket. I could feel her hand trembling. We were still 1.5 miles from the trailhead, and the terrain below us was getting steeper, which meant we could not just break into a full run without risking a twisted ankle or a bad fall. I made myself breathe. I made myself think. I called out loudly, the way you are supposed to do when you think a bear might be in your area. Hey, hey, we know you are there. Then the footsteps again, closer this time. My girlfriend made a small sound that I had never heard from her before. She was terrified, and she was not a person who scared easily. We covered that last 1.5 miles faster than we had ever covered any trail in our lives. I do not remember how we did it without one of us going down on the shale. I remember looking back twice. The second time I looked, in a long straight section of trail, maybe 200 feet ahead of a sharp bend, I saw movement. Not an animal, not a hiker, just movement. Something pulling back into the tree line at the edge of my vision. Something that had been in the open for a half second too long. We reached the trailhead. We got to my car, got in, locked the doors. My girlfriend was shaking. I was shaking. The blue sedan was still in the parking lot. I remember staring at it as we drove away. We did not talk much on the drive home. What do you say? What do you do with something like that? I kept trying to give it a rational explanation the whole way back. A hiker who didn't want to pass us. Someone playing a prank. Kids messing around in the trees. But even as I assembled those explanations, something in me rejected them, one by one. The pacing was too precise. The silence when I called out was too absolute. And that movement at the edge of my vision, the way it had pulled back, it was not the movement of an animal, and it was not the movement of someone who simply wanted to be alone on the trail. It was the movement of something that did not want to be seen. When we got home, My girlfriend called her mother. That tells you everything you need to know about how shaken she was. She was not the type to call family over something small. I filed a report with the Park Service. Not even sure what I expected from that. Just felt like the right thing to do. I described what we heard, what I saw, where on the trail it started, the direction of movement. I did not hear back for 4 days. On the 5th day, a man in a county sheriff's vehicle pulled into my driveway. He was polite, unhurried, the kind of calm that comes from years of dealing with things that most people never see. He asked me to walk him through everything again. I did. He took notes. When I finished, I asked him what they found. He looked down at the notepad in his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up. He said, "I'm not going to tell you what we found or who it was." I started to speak, and he held up one hand. He said, "If I tell you what we found, you will never hike again, and I do not want that for you." He said, "What we found was not normal, and it will not happen up here again." He said that with a certainty that I have never been able to entirely make peace with. Not will not happen again because they arrested someone. Not will not happen again because they identified a person. Will not happen again, as if whatever was up there was no longer there. As if the problem had been resolved in some way. He was unwilling to describe. He shook my hand. He got back in his vehicle. He left. I have turned those words over in my head for years. I have tried to imagine what they found that would make a sheriff, a man who has seen the worst of what people do to each other, decide to protect someone else from the information. I have tried to imagine what could live in those woods, what could pace a trail at that altitude, what could go quiet when called out and leave behind something bad enough that a law enforcement officer would choose silence over transparency. I never went back to that trail. The following summer, I looked it up online. That section of mountain burned in a wildfire. The whole trail, from the ridge down to the trailhead, was gone. I do not know if that is a coincidence. I do not know if it means anything. But sometimes when I am out in the woods on a different trail, in a different state, I hear something move behind me, and I stop, and I listen, and I remember what he said. Will not happen up here again. And I wonder what that cost. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, and I am not a man who uses words like ghost lightly. I do not come from a family that told ghost stories around the dinner table. I was not raised on horror. I was raised on practicality, on solving problems, on explaining the world in terms that could be verified. What I am about to tell you does not have a practical explanation. I've been trying to find one for over a decade. This happened during a field training exercise in the deep woods of a military installation in the southeastern United States. I was 23 years old. It was late autumn, October or early November, the leaves mostly down, the undergrowth thin enough to see through, the ground soft with recent rain. The exercise had been going on for about 36 hours when I got separated from my unit. Not dramatically, not with any great moment of panic, just the slow, grinding accumulation of disorientation that happens when you have been awake for 2 days, moving at night, in dense terrain without GPS. At some point I was moving with my fire team. At some later point I was not. I do not know exactly when it happened. The woods in that part of the country are different from what most people imagine when they think of southern forests. They are dense, not the open longleaf pine country you see in photographs, but thick mixed forest with heavy undergrowth, kudzu and briars that close in on the game trails, ridge terrain that channels sound in ways that defeat your sense of direction. I had a compass. I knew how to use it. But in terrain like that, a compass tells you direction, not distance. And when you are not entirely sure where you started, direction is not always enough. I walked for what I estimated was an hour. I did not find anything familiar. The light was coming down, late afternoon turning toward dusk, the sky going orange between the trees, the temperature dropping fast. I stopped and thought about my options. I could stay put and wait to be found. I could try to reach higher ground for a better sense of the terrain. Or I could keep moving on the bearing I had been holding and hope it put me somewhere recognizable. I chose to keep moving. I found a game trail heading roughly northeast and followed it for another 20 minutes. And then I came around a bend in the trail and found 3 men standing in a small clearing. They were not in uniform. They were not carrying weapons. They were not part of any exercise I was aware of. They were older men. I put them each somewhere between 50 and 70, wearing what I can only describe as plain, unremarkable clothes. Denim and flannel. No pack, no gear, no vehicle in sight, and no road nearby. Just three older men, standing in the middle of the woods on a military installation that civilians were not permitted to access without escort. I stopped. I looked at them. They looked at me. One of them, the tallest of the three, gray-haired, standing slightly in front of the others, raised his hand and pointed back down the trail to my left, and then a slight angle to the right. He did not speak. He just pointed. I do not know why I trusted it. I do not know why I did not ask questions, did not verify, did not challenge why three civilians were standing in restricted government woodlands in the middle of a training exercise. Something about the way they stood there, calm, unhurried, absolutely certain, made me believe them. I nodded. I went the direction the man had pointed. 40 minutes later, I walked into the perimeter of my unit's position. My sergeant was the first one to see me. He told me I was the last one back, and that they had been about to send a search element for me. I said there had been 3 men in the woods near the northeast ridge, and that they had pointed me back. My sergeant looked at me for a long time. He said I was the last one back. He said there was no one else out there. He said no civilian had been logged in for that exercise. I asked my fire team members if they had seen any civilians during the movement. None of them had. I described the men, their age, their clothes, exactly where they had been standing, the direction the tall one had pointed. Every man I talked to had the same expression, the expression of someone trying to be careful about what they say next. Later that evening, one of the older NCOs, a staff sergeant who had been stationed at that installation before, took me aside. He asked me to describe the clearing. I did. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told me that a unit would trained in that same area years before, in the 1960s or 70s, he was not sure which, had lost 3 men in those woods. A patrol that went out and never came back, never recovered. He said that over the years, Marines who got lost in that section of the training area had occasionally reported being pointed in the right direction by a small group of men they could not account for. Always 3, always older, always pointing, always gone by the time the lost man found his way back. I have told this story a number of times. Most people find a rational explanation and hold on to it. An isolated community, they say. Hunters who somehow got access, disoriented and hallucinating from sleep deprivation. I have tried all of those explanations. I have tried them seriously, with the same methodical practicality I bring to everything. They do not hold. The installation is not accessible to civilians without escort and documentation. There was no record of any civilian access that day. I was not hallucinating. I have been checked, and I do not present with any history of episodes of that kind. And the direction the man pointed me was exactly correct. Not approximately correct. Exactly. In terrain I had never navigated before. A man who should not have been there pointed me home without a word. I got out of the Marine Corps 4 years after that. I now live in a city, and I do not go into deep woods anymore. Not because I am afraid of what I saw, but because of what I felt standing in that clearing looking at those 3 men. It was not fear. It was something more complicated than fear. Something like the feeling you get when you are standing very close to something very old that has been waiting for a very long time, and it turns its attention toward you. And you understand all at once that the world is far larger and far stranger than the version of it you have been living in. I was grateful. I was terrified. And I have never once been able to say which feeling was stronger. I only know that they were pointing me toward the living. And I do not let myself think too hard about what that tells me about where they were.